Welcome everyone to another poetry recording by English with Joshua. This is poem number 2 on the English grade 12 prescribed poetry list. The title of the poem is The Child Who Was Shot Dead in Nyanga. The poet is Ingrid Jonker. As we look at the background of the poet, Ingrid Jonker was born in the Northern Cape on 19 September 1933. Her parents separated very early in her life. Jonker began writing poetry as a young girl, producing her first poetry collection, Nadi Somer, at the age of 13. The relationship with her father was quite a tumultuous and bitter one. He was instrumental in implementing censorship laws on art, publications, and entertainment. So their political differences were quite humiliating and they were made publicly known. And Abraham publicly denied Ingrid as his daughter. She was a member of the Zestigers, a group of anti-establishment poets and writers who challenged the conservative literary norms and censorship of the 1950s and 60s in South Africa. The multiple losses of her childhood, her failed marriages, the anxiety resulting from her affairs with literary figures Jack Cope and Andre P. Brunk, and her father's bitter rejection finally proved overwhelming. So on the night of 19th July 1965, she walked into the sea at 3 Anchor Bay, where a memorial now honors her legacy. The background of the poem. Ingrid Jonker had written the poem following a visit to the Philippi police station to see the body of a child who had been shot dead in his mother's arms by the police in the township of Nyanga in Cape Town. It happened in the aftermath of the massacre of 69 people in Sharpeville, south of Johannesburg, in March 1960. They were marching to the police station to protest against having to carry passbooks. Nelson Mandela read this poem in the original Afrikaans during his address at the opening of the first Democratic Parliament on May 24, 1994. This protest poem is about a child who was killed by the police during the anti-pass laws protests across South Africa. The poem reflects on these pass laws of apartheid in South Africa. Especially, the Sharpeville massacre stirred Ingrid Jonker to write this poem in resistance of the brutality against innocent people. The shooting of a young child in his mother's arms during a protest against the pass laws had Ingrid Jonker penning down this poem. The poem describes how the child who was killed during the protest is metaphorically still alive. His screams resemble the tone of freedom, identity, and protest. According to the speaker, the metaphorical child has grown bigger than the oppressors ever thought of. The child was killed while on his way to the doctor with his mother. The senselessness of this death is the result of the senselessness of the apartheid laws. This child remains nameless to represent all innocent lives taken during apartheid. He is present everywhere. Ironically, now he does not need a pass to roam. The child is not dead. The child raises his fists against his mother, who screams Africa, screams the smell of freedom and heather in the locations of the heart under siege. The child raises his fists against his father in the march of the generations who scream Africa, scream the smell of justice and blood in the streets of his armed pride. The child is not dead, neither at Langa or at Nyanga, nor at Orlando, nor at Sharpeville, nor at the police station in Philippi, where he lies with a bullet in his head. The child is the shadow of the soldiers on guard with guns, saccharines, and batons. The child is present at all meetings and legislations. The child peeps through the windows of houses and into the hearts of mothers. The child who just wanted to play in the sun at Nyanga is everywhere. The child who became a man treks through all of Africa. The child who became a giant travels through the whole world without a pass. As we look at the title of the poem highlights the idea that violence within a country destroys innocent members of society, that being women and children, and the damages that is caused to the country and its future is dire. The child's death has inspired others to take up the cause of freedom and give a new energy to the struggle against apartheid. Jonker yearns for a time when a child can grow and make his or her impact on the world without restrictions of the past laws. As we look at the title of the poem, The Child Who Was Shot Dead in Nyanga, this title evokes a sympathetic response. A child is someone who is vulnerable and helpless against armed soldiers. It also shows that the cruelty and the senselessness of death is quite evident during apartheid. Let's look at the form or structure of the poem. Although this poem is separated into 4 sections, it is devoid of a specific rhyme scheme. Therefore, it is a free verse. The isolated final line emphasizes the poet's message. Freedom is needed. The 4th stanza develops the idea of this child's wasted life, what he could have become had he lived. There is a parallel structure in not at, repeated in the 3rd stanza. The rhetorical device gives examples of where police brutality occurred. It gives a historical accuracy to this poem. We also need to look at the one-line coda. It emphasizes the poet's message, freedom is needed. A coda is an epilogue that concludes a story. This could be an entire chapter, a few paragraphs, lines, or even a single sentence. In this poem, it is a single sentence, line 23, ending as without a pause. It is written in the 3rd person point of view. We also see an iambic rhythm, da-dum, that resonates with the footsteps of protests. There are quite a few repetitions of similar sounds, and this we call internal rhyme. Notice that there is also enjambment in this poem. These are run-on lines. It kind of creates a free flow of thought and symbolizes their freedom that will come one day. This enjambment is indicated by a lack of punctuation, so it emphasizes the child's influence and that it is never ending. We also see in synecdoche. This is a figure of speech in which a part of something stands for the whole. And here the synecdoche is the child, representing a whole, which is the youth of South Africa. The child is not dead. The child raises his fists against his mother, who screams Africa, screams the smell of freedom and heather in the locations of the heart under siege. The child is not dead is a repetition. The repetition of the child throughout the poem emphasizes the age and the innocence of the youth and highlights how many children were killed because of apartheid laws. This repetition we also call anaphora. Is not dead. This contradicts the title. Metaphorically, he will live on by becoming a symbol. The child is a symbol of the growing sense of freedom in the hearts of people against the apartheid system. This child becomes a metaphor of resistance, hope, and innocence. The child raises his fists against his mother. Raises his fists. Fists here become a symbol of resistance and revolution. The diction conveys the distress and the anger of the child or the younger generation, and that they are rebelling against his mother. The child is not happy with his parents or the older generation being submissive. They did not fight hard enough, and the resistance of the younger generation will not be passive. We see an S alliteration. This emphasizes the urgency and the desperate cries of the oppressed people. As we look at the word screams, this is a repetition here in the poem, and it emphasizes the anger. We also hear the figure of speech onomatopoeia in the word screams. We also look at the word heather. Heather is a plant with small flowers. Jonker connects freedom to the smell of flowers. Freedom will be like the sweet scents of the flowers. In the locations of the heart under siege. The heart under siege here speaks of the people who are oppressed or segregated from the mainstream. Locations is a pun. Here, the speaker speaks of black townships or where something is located. The child's message, that being the aspirations of the black population, will continue in the heart of all the people. Stanza 2. The child raises his fists against his father. We see here that the younger generation rebels not only against the system, but also against the older generation. The reference to the different parent emphasizes the generation gap, that it is now the time of the youth to take up the fight in the march of the generations. March here alludes to military action. Generations speaks of the younger people who are prepared to go further. They are prepared to use violence. Many join the ANC military arm, Umkhonto weSizwe, who scream Africa, scream the smell of justice. The repetition of line 3 emphasizes their anger, the desperate cries of the oppressed people and urgency to fight. Of justice and blood, the younger generation is willing to spill blood or sacrifice their lives for freedom. In the streets of his armed pride, here we see that the tone is very passionate and inspiring. It emphasizes that they are willing to fight to restore their dignity or their pride. Stanza 3. The child is not dead. The repetition of line 1 emphasizes that the child is physically or medically dead, but not spiritually or poetically. We also see here that where he lies with a bullet on his head. This paradox highlights the fact that the child died physically, but he is still alive in the hearts of all Africans. He becomes the symbol of innocence, resistance, and hope. Neither at Langa or at Nyanga, nor at Orlando, nor at Sharpeville. These were the sites of violent protests against apartheid. This also shows that protests had spread throughout the country. Sharpeville gives the allusion to the Sharpeville massacre, nor at the police station in Philippi. Here the poet speaks of the Cape Flats, where Jonker saw the body of the child that prompted this poem. The child is the shadow of the soldiers. This metaphor compares the child to the shadow of soldiers. This is a warning or a reminder of the possibility of violence and the hope for change that lies in the youth. Line 17. On guard with guns and Saracens and batons. Saracens. These are armored cars that are synonymous with the apartheid in South Africa. The soldiers were fully equipped, showing that they would use force to suppress the blacks, not caring who died, be it women or children. The authorities wanted to protect the status quo. The child is present at all the meetings and legislations. The death of the child is discussed by all people, the apartheid government and the black people. The apartheid government tried to introduce new laws or legislation, while black people were inspired to fight against the government. In line 19, the child peeps through the windows of houses and into the hearts of mothers. People will always be remembered and were determined that it would not happen again. The child who just wanted to play in the sun at Nyanga is everywhere. The child who became a man treks through Africa. Line 20 creates the image of a child who was an innocent victim. He simply wanted to enjoy his childhood. While line 21, the child acts as a symbol. The child affects all aspects of life. The child, as a symbol, will become more powerful, will inspire the whole continent. The child who became a giant travels through the world. When we look at the word giant, the child has become larger than life. The death of the child and others who fought for freedom has had a massive influence on the growing sense of freedom, justice, and resistance by all those who were oppressed. Travels through the whole world. What happened to the child will be a global effect. Many countries protested against the brutality and the injustice of the apartheid system. Without a pause. The last line of the poem forms a coda, as was mentioned previously. It was also mentioned that a coda is an epilogue that concludes a story. This could be an entire chapter, like I said, a paragraph, a line, or even a single sentence. This conveys the final message and the irony of the poem. The dead do not require a pass. You first have to die to walk around freely. The pass refers to the apartheid identity document that was used to restrict movement of the black population. This was the main reason for the violent protests at Langa, Nyanga, and Sharpeville. The pass system caused the death of the child, causing him to become a symbol, able to cross borders and continents unrestricted. You cannot control the minds of people. The themes evident in the poem are as follows. Firstly, freedom. Ultimately, the speaker dreams of a time when all people will be free. This freedom includes the freedom of speech, movement, and in all human rights. Freedom from apartheid and its brutal laws. The second theme is resistance. This child stands up for what he knows is right, and he is the symbol that can never die. He is not a physical person, but an idea. There is resistance against the blatant brutality and barbarism against the innocents. His raised fist symbolized the yearning for freedom, identity, and protest. The last theme explored is protest and resistance. The tone of the poem. Firstly, defiance and determination. Secondly, despite the sadness about the innocent child's death, the tone is not sympathetic or sad. Thirdly, there is a sense of outrage and loss. Nationalistic. Jonker highlights the fact that even an innocent child understood the value of freedom and equality. The mood is angry, protesting, and unrelenting. This is a passbook that was used to implement pass laws. The Sharpeville massacre played a significant role as many people were fighting against pass laws. As we look at the question paper that was of 2023, we must remember that it is important to angle how you look at the questions in order to maximize on the marks. Question 2.1 reads, what does the line neither at Langa nor at Nyanga convey about the state of the country? Your response should have taken this effect. The country was in a state of disaster, and that's why the poet most likely decided to mention different areas. In these areas, there were revolts all over the country. Or you could have said, violent reactions to protests were not isolated but spread across the country. The state did not use minimal violence, not in Nyanga nor in any other place where people protested. The child's memory is very much alive everywhere in South Africa. Langa and Nyanga are used as symbols for any place in South Africa. These ideas could have afforded you 2 marks. As we look at question 2.2, explain what shadow in line 16 suggests about the effect of the child's death for 2 marks. Your response should have taken this effect. The shadow cannot be eradicated, and therefore the memory or the consequences of the child's death continue to lurk behind every soldier. You would have received 2 marks for this idea. Question 2.3, refer to lines 18 to 20. The child is present at all the meetings and legislations. The child peeps through the windows of houses and into the hearts of mothers. The child who just wanted to play in the sun at Nyanga is everywhere. Discuss the effectiveness of this image, the child, in context of the poem. Your response should be, the child or the image of the child effectively evokes innocence and a sense of universality. A child is young and impressionable. However, these innocents were activists who lost their lives in the struggle for freedom and equality. The child, any of the many who paid the greatest price, became the symbol of the loss incurred in the struggle and the revolution. The revolution ideology would mature from child to man to giant. So the image of the child transcended from innocent child to man to a giant. Question 2.4. Critically discuss the significance of the message that is created in the final stanza without a pause. That was for 3 marks. The response should be, the statement ridicules the reason for the child's death. A pass was a permit to travel to another area. The initial revolt against the system gained impetus with the death of every child. The spirit of the revolt could not be confined to a space as the revolution spread across Africa and gained sympathy across the world. So ironically, this movement was without license. And there is no pause, there's no comma, no semicolon, no hyphen in the poem. And after this statement, there is no full stop. This proves that the revolution could not and would not be stopped. The message that one or the child travels without a pause is ironic, as the dead do not need a pause to travel. This freedom is achieved by his death, and his death is the catalyst for change. Freedom from oppression for all South Africans. You need to maximize on your marks. This is the marking guideline as I've explained it with the question paper. The resources that I've used are mentioned below. Thank you so much for tuning in to this video. I hope that this will assist you in your prelims, your June exams, as well as your finals.